Okay, and thank you for inviting me to be here at the museum and talk a little bit about how my family came to Montana and just a bit about the businesses that were in Nashua when I was growing up and some of the activities that I remember from my school years. There are a number of written histories about Nashua, and all relate that it was founded to be on the railroad line. Now, the railroad arrived in 1887, and people followed, although there were some before that too. And according to a history, the town was platted and dedicated in 1908. Now, my family came later when the reservation was opened up for homesteading. My mom was Bernice Johnson, and she was 3 years old when she came on the train with her mother and her older sister and her grandmother, Rachel Berg. Her father, George William Johnson, had come earlier in order to build a house for the family to live in, and with him was his father-in-law, George Berg, and his brother-in-law, Henry Berg. And all three of them had gotten homesteads in the same community, and they had houses close together. And they were in the Shirley community, and that is north and west of Fraser, about 10 miles. And there was a school there called the Shirley School. And Mom and her siblings and her Berg cousins attended that school. Is the microphone okay?
Yeah.
Okay. For high school, she went into Nashua, and she had to find room and board because there was no dormitory at that time. And so she had to find someone to board with in order to go to school. So my dad was Elmer Niebagen. He was born in Kirkhoven, Minnesota, and he was the first generation out of Norway. His mother had come from Norway, as had his father. And later the family lived in New Effington, South Dakota. My uncle Adolph had come to Montana the year before in 1915, and he had homesteaded, and he encouraged his mother and his siblings to come and join him. And so in June of 1916, his mother Margaret, with some relatives, came to Montana, drove to Montana to claim their homesteads. There's a good story about it in the Nashua history book about that trip. It's about 600 miles, but it took them 10 days, and I guess if there was bad roads, lots of getting stuck and having to be pulled out. So anyhow, they did make it to Montana, to Nashua, to Valley County, and Grandma Margaret was eligible to file on land for a homestead because she was a single person, a single lady, and therefore the head of the household. At that time, women were not allowed to homestead. And so anyhow, the group of them that came stayed with Uncle Adolph and found the land, and they were in the same vicinity then as what Adolph was, about 15 miles north of Nashua. Okay. Hesitate. Okay, so they got their land, they filed on it and everything, and then the group returned to South Dakota and made their plans. Now, Margaret's family included sons, Clarence, Elmer, Bill, Carl, and a daughter, Myrtle. They were all teenagers and already experienced at working on the farm. So the old boys came out and stayed with Adolph, and they built a house and dug a well so that the family would have a place to live when they came the next year. And so the family back in South Dakota made plans with the railroad to ship their belongings to Nashua so that they could come to do their homesteading. Now, Margaret had a large family, but they were workers, and they all worked on the homestead, and they made progress because they were workers. And there's lots of stories to tell, and I won't go into a lot of them because they are in my book that I published last year about my family. The book is My Roots Run Deep, and there is a copy here at the museum. They persevered. They had livestock and crops and ingenuity. Elmer would catch and break the horses, the wild horses that ran in the tomato can pasture. And that was east of their home out on the farm. And then he'd break them and tame them down, and then he'd sell them. So that and other ways they persevered. And as some of their neighbors had to sell out, or the drought was bad and crops were poor and price was down. But so if they moved on and sold their property, their holdings, then Margaret and her family bought those. And of course, when they bought that, they were able to get, usually there was a house on that property, so that house got moved over and was added to the house that the boys had built, because it was really small, like the houses were at that time. So anyhow, they got the house got bigger and more modern. It never did get electricity, but it did have carbide that was piped to every room to supply light. And when you think, well, they had to move a house, but you know, in those days it was pretty easy to move a house. There were no electric lines, there was no plumbing pipes, so it was easy to connect a house. And they were carpenters, so they put it together. So anyhow, that house is still standing up 15 miles north of Nashua, but it's deserted and lonely. I get lonely for it. The Niebocken farm did celebrate as a centennial farm a few years back. Elmer and Bernice were married in 1932, and Mom joined in to join the family, moved in to join the family. And so that is how my family settled in Valley County. Now, a few years later, Margaret, my grandmother Margaret, and her new husband, Louis Johnson, moved west to Ronan, and my parents purchased the land. At the time, Nashua was a thriving community. I have a commencement program from 1935, and it lists 15 graduates and 14 eighth graders and 37 business establishments in Nashua. And actually, there were more than what had sponsored that brochure. Okay, so Nashua had everything that a town needed. But in 1936, there was a huge fire, and it wiped out many of them. Firefighting was difficult and included a water bucket brigade at that time, water coming from the town pump. There was no public water service, and they ran out of water. Many businesses were lost, at least a dozen, including a couple of stores, a couple of hotels. The Nashua history book tells a great deal more, as does the Nashua Messenger, and that was the local newspaper at the time. The Nashua Independent had been here before, but now it's the Nashua Messenger. And there had been another major fire in Nashua just a few years before, and after 2 fires, the city council passed a ruling that no more frame buildings could be built on Main Street. I wonder how that has been enforced. I don't know if it was enforced. So in September that year, though, the city council voted for the construction of the city water sewer system. So they did get their water system. So that was in 36 was the fire. Well, I was born in 36 on the farm. I joined my older brother Wayne in the family. And I guess it was a hard winter because Mom couldn't get to town to go to the doctor for the delivery as she had expected to. But there was a neighborhood phone system with wires strung from post to post, and they had that way to notify a neighbor who was going to town to please send the doctor. And Nashua did have a doctor, and the doctor came to me. My Uncle Adolph went to meet him and help him through the snow. No county snow plows at that time. In fact, I do not even know if the road if it was even a gravel road yet. So I grew up on that homestead that was 15 miles north, and all that entails and growing up on a farm. Many of the people that here come to the museum have also grown up on a farm, and they know you learn to cook and bake and care for a garden, including picking potato bugs, which seemed to be a job that they always gave to the kids, you know. Also, we picked rocks out of the fields using an old stone boat that was hooked to the Fordson tractor. We gathered eggs, and I learned to butcher chickens, and I learned to drive, remembering to park that old pickup on an incline on the hill so that when you couldn't start, you could just give it a little push and then hop in and pop the clutch, and there you go. And do you think kids would understand how to do that? They might, I don't know. Another of my jobs at that time was my trap line, and the trap line involved gophers. There were so many gophers in the pasture, and the gophers were dangerous. The gopher holes were dangerous because if a cow or a horse should step into the gopher hole and break a leg, that would be kind of tragic. So anyhow, I had multiple traps, and I ran that trap line 2 and 3 times a day. And so we'd come to the hole, and there was a trap, and the gopher was in the trap, so you'd grab the trap and swing it and kill the gopher. And then you'd reset the trap to do it again. But then I'd also pull the tail off and put it in my jean pocket. And so then I would take that tail back to my dad, who gave me a nickel for each tail. So I was making good money. That was good money for a kid. I could get a number of gophers in a day, and a dime would buy a comic book, and even a nice cream cone could be bought for a dime. So that was good money for a kid. There was lots of work on the farm, as you well know. My neighbors at that time, or the neighbors for our family at that time, north of Nashua, the close ones within a few miles, were the Brants, the Kummerfelds, the Delbaums, and my cousin, the Carl Niebakken family. However, for school, when my brother got ready for school, we did move to town. My parents had purchased a farm on the east end of Nashua, and we moved there for the school year, and back, of course, in the spring. So everything moved. The milk cow, the chickens, the cats, the dogs, everything was moved to town. And in the fall of the year, it came to town. In the spring, it went back up so that we could be on the farm for the farm work. So the cows, the range cows, would be trailed to town. Well, one year they knew the routine, and one year we hadn't gotten up to get them yet, I guess, and they showed up on their own, walking the 15 miles, trailing down, so they came sawing. And then one year we were chasing those cows north again in the spring of the year, and I was riding my brother's Shetland pony, moving the cows north, and we came to a small stream of water, and Domino decided to roll in the water. Well, I jumped clear. You had to be alert on Domino at all the times. She just shy at anything, thistle blowing across in front of her, and yet such a nice pony because we could put 5 and 6 kids on her, and we often did, and she'd be so patient. So a trip to town in the summertime was exciting for this kid. When I was young, it was just looking forward to go to town, but it was 15 miles of dirt and gravel, and for a while gas was rationed during that time, so we did not go often. When we went, Mom would deliver eggs, cream, butter products to her customers, and the full cream can would go to the depot to catch the next train to go to the creamery in Williston. Nashua had pretty much all we needed. We'd get the few groceries we needed. We raised so much of our own, but we still needed some. And my dad would get what he needed. Things were on his list. And we did not go to town often and easily, so you made lists and you planned. Nowadays we kind of just jump in the car and go, but it wasn't that easy. And those gravel roads were not welcoming. So I was about 5 years old one time when we were in town, and I had been with my parents at the Farmers Union Oil, and that, as you may know, it's on the north side of the street, and then the other business on the south side of the main street there at Nashua. Well, Nashua was experimenting with parking cars in the middle of the street instead of having them up to the curb. Well, I ran ahead of my folks. Probably got in trouble for that, huh? But anyhow, ran ahead of my folks, and I was thinking I was going to jump up and I'd be at the store on the sidewalk in front of the store, and instead I was in front of a car, and I got hit. And I remember a Mr. Merle Priest coming out of his drugstore carrying Kleenex or maybe hankies. I don't know if they had many Kleenex at that time or not, but something to stop the blood. And there must have not been a doctor in Nashua anymore at that time, because they took me to Glasgow to have stitches put in my cheek. So the Priest drugstore is an early memory of Nashua's businesses to me. And later that business was sold to Jim and Mildred McGarvey family. Now they moved to Nashua from Fort Peck. And later it was the Harold Miller family, and finally the Bergstrom family that had the drugstore. And let's just kind of walk down the street and think about the businesses that were in Nashua at that time and recall some of them. Agriculture was the industry in the area. And so, of course, there were grain elevators by the railroad tracks. Now, Merlin Sunheim ran one of those elevators at one time. And I also remember a Mr. Leonard Curtis and a George Berg who operated the grain elevators. To the east of the railroad crossing, there was a scale and a sugar beet pile in the fall of the year. Beets were grown in the area for a number of years. Migrant workers came to the area to work in the beet fields. And also by the tracks to the west end of town were the stockyards. There were many large cattle ranches, and Nashua was a main shipping point at that time. Ranchers would bring their cattle, sometimes by truck, but more often trail them in and load them on the train. The rancher would ride along with the train, take them to Minnesota or Iowa or Chicago, wherever they were going to their markets. The stockyards were still busy when I was in school, not sure when they were dismantled. Business between the tracks and Nashua Main Street included the Farmers Union Station, and for many years that was managed by Carl Bollinger, the Bollingers were a pioneer family in Nashua. And there was also a city office on that side of the street, and there were some equipment and repair shops to the west of the oil station. The Allsburg family had a repair shop. There was an implement shop, and I think that was Ben Stenbakken that had that. Later, Stenbakken had the Chevy dealership, but that was on the south side of the street. So also on the south side of the street, there were 3 grocery stores at that time. One was owned by Elmer Hauger, and I think that is the store that became the B&B with the Burt family, and other owners, and it's still open thanks to Vicki Talzine. Another one was the Farmers Union Market, and that was community owned. They had lockers in that store that could be rented. We had no electricity at our home, no deep freeze, and when we butchered a beef or a pig, whatever it should be, we could take it to the store, and then they would cut it and package, and it would be stored in our rented locker space. And then on our weekly trips to town, we could pick up the meat that we would need for the next week. There was the Gamble store. Effie and Audrey Hensrud owned the store, and their family lived in the apartment that was behind the store. Later, the Gamble store was owned by Jack and Jeanette Fike. There was another hardware store, and that was owned and operated by Emil and Ellis Remke. It was a big building toward the west end of Main Street. Now, the Remkes lived in an apartment in the back of that building with their 2 children. In my memory, the inside of that store was a big building. It was a second floor that was open, with an open balcony. And I don't remember ever getting up there, but I remember looking at it and thinking that it was a very elegant thing. Alice Remke was also a school teacher later on. Okay, a store that was fun for me to go to was the Usman Bakery. Lola and Otto Usman. They had such good treats in their display case. But the fascinating thing to me was the machine that sliced the bread. They could put a whole loaf of bread on that platform and push it through or button whatever, how it went through, and it came out the other side, all evenly sliced. Oh my. Now our bread at home was good, very good bread. We sliced our own, but that bread slicer was so intriguing to me. I was in grade school at that time, so sometime in the 40s. Later, that building became a second-hand furniture store operated by Dave Bell. His daughter, it was Winnie Erickson. She worked at the school for many years, and he also had a son named Dorman. Now, the Fouts family had a store. I don't remember what they sold in their store. There was also a pool hall. There were a number of restaurants, and that was when I was school age. The bowling alley came later, and there were bars, 2 or 3 of them, and there were slot machines in most of them, and they paid off in silver, none of that paper stuff that you have to have now. Okay, the city center was built in about 49 or 50, and they held dances many Saturdays after that. But before that, there was the open-air dancing in the Bowery. It was just a wooden frame and a floor that was raised, and oh my, there's many Saturday night dances there. It was located right across the street from the Lions Club Park or the Senior Citizen or the Civic Center, right in that area, in that corner. Now, I was probably an 8th grader before my parents allowed me to go along occasionally. My dad had taught me to dance with the old battery-powered radio, listening to CKCK Regina. It's the only station we could get. And anyhow, in the Grand Ole Opry. And I got pretty good at the schottisches. But I had also learned to dance in school. Do you remember Mrs. Billy Wiley? She was my teacher in the 3rd grade, and later she was the 5th grade teacher. We danced in her class every week, and all Christmas programs had a dance when she was teaching, the do-si-do kind of dancing. Okay, the Civic Center, when it was built, it featured movies a few nights a week, I think maybe on the weekend, and it featured the roller skating. Of course, for the movies, they had to put the folding chairs down and then take them back up after the show was over. And the roller skating, they started that when I was a teenager. Mr. Jack Wiley, Billy's husband, was in charge. Oh my, and he could really skate. And the Nashville Lions continue that skating tradition today, and we Nashville supporters have got to be pretty proud of that. So, okay, we've talked about the street, the business street, but on the north side of the tracks was mostly the schools and the churches were there, but there were also buildings along the railroad on the north side, right close to the railroad. A lot of guys worked on the railroad and on the section crew, as I remember. And the large house was for the section foreman. Not sure if that was his correct title. When I was in high school, the couple who lived there were square dancers, and they taught square dancing to the kids in town. And I think that was a Mr. and Mrs. Bill White, and fun to square dance with them. Sounds like I must have enjoyed dancing. Okay, so on the north side of the tracks, also the depot was still there. Now the depot agent had a system for getting the mail collected by the trains as they went through. The trains would pick up the mail and go, and you could send telegrams from the depot. There were lots of choices for passenger trains before Amtrak. You could ride a train to Glasgow and shop and back in the afternoon. When I was in grade school, my mom would pick me up at grade school and take me to the depot and would buy a ticket, and then I could get on the skidoo and go to Wolf Point to visit my grandparents. That was always a treat. It would be fun to have that skidoo still running. So, okay, up along Highway 2, before the new highway was built, and that was built in about 56 or 57, the Clarence White family had a small grocery store and gas pumps. Also a small, not really a motel, but cabins for travelers. And it was about a block from the high school, so kids could go to the White store and get snacks during the noon hour. Most town kids went home for their noon meal, or you could go to the dormitory for hot lunch. The dormitory was located on Rosemary Street across from the Nazarene Church, and it was halfway between the grade school and the high school. Mrs. Bollinger and Mrs. Scholl were the cooks that I remember when I was in grade school. I only ate there occasionally. I usually went home. But when the new school was built, hot lunch was then served in the cafeteria school building, in the new building. And I remember Mrs. Snyder as the cook. So, memories of school. I went all through grade school in the 3-story brick school building that was along Highway 2 and kind of to the west of town, across from the Catholic Church. It had been built in 1918. So 7th grade's there, and for the 8th grade, we went over to the high school building. For me, that was in 1949, and the new grade school was under construction at that time. So I was one of the last classes to attend that school. A strong memory from that school was when President Roosevelt died. How Mrs. Carver, who was the superintendent and sixth grade teacher at that time, had all of the students go out and line up in front of the school. We had no assembly hall area, but we went outside, and there was a little program that they lowered the flag, and we all said the Pledge of Allegiance. And that probably stood out to my memory more than if they had talked about doing something to honor a president in a class. They also had a little program, a similar program, when they rejoiced at the end of World War II. So according to the history books, there were log buildings that had served as schools prior to that, starting in 1899. Now the new grade school was more than just a grade school, as the shop and home ec classes were also in that new building. So, however, the nice gymnasium that's currently at the school was not added until later, after I was out of high school. Basketball was played in the old gym. Now the old gym, it was in the library that now looks so small, and that's where the ball games were. And my family often attended ball games. In 1950, we had a great team. And in fact, it took first at Class C tournament. Of course, they had to win the district and the divisional in order to get to the state tournament. I was in grade school, and my family attended the divisional tournament. It was held at the Civic Center in Glasgow. Good game, and at the end, as the MC was standing at center court and awarding the trophies, he commented about the long shots. By the way, long shots at that time were only 2 points, not 3-pointers. But anyhow, he held the ball out to co-captain Jack Hill and offered to let him try again for one of those long shots. Talk about pressure. But Jack took the ball, bounced it, shot it up, and he made the basket. Oh my, it was really exciting. Oh, but there was a co-captain, and so the MC turned to Frank Johnson. He was the other co-captain. He asked if he would like to try. So now the pressure was really on. And from mid-court, he too bounced the ball, shot it up, and he made his basket. And the crowd went wild. It was great. Anyhow, Larry O'Connor was the coach. He had been for years, and he continued long after. The team went to Bozeman, where they took first place. In fact, 3 years later, Nashua again got to go to state tournament. First, it was in Deer Lodge, clear across the state, and my parents took a load of us girls to go and cheer. And although they did not place, we were pretty proud of that team. But the next year, in 1954, they were again at state tournament in Great Falls. And one of the top players was sick. He was in the hospital. But the team still took second, so they were a great team. Other memories of my school days. One winter, there was a terrible blizzard. I think 51 or 2. And anyhow, Mr. Cahill, he was superintendent at that time, Clarence Cahill, and he would not send the buses out. And now Nashua had a lot of kids that came in on the buses, the Fort Peck kids and the North Country kids and so on. And word went out somehow. There were phones at school. We did not have a phone in our house, and many others did not. But people got the message, and they came to take kids home to stay with them. 2 of my friends rode the Fort Peck bus, and so they came to my house, as well as 3 siblings from the Crow family. And they were new to the area and a long ways away from the road, so they would have a ways to get in when they got off the bus. But anyhow, they came and stayed at our house. And I've thought many times about the parents of those kids, like the Crow family did not have a phone. We didn't even have a radio in the area at that time in order to get word to them. And I've often thought of that mother and how she must have been very worried about her children. But anyhow, they were safe at our house. And come evening, though, the storm had kind of settled and subsided. And I mentioned, there's square dancing tonight. And so my parents first of all, my parents had an old Army Jeep. An old Army Jeep. And I had 4-wheel drive, before 4-wheel drive was a popular thing to have. Anyhow, my parents let us girls take that Jeep and go to the dance for a few hours. And the next day, the highway department had to call in a big roto kind of a machine to clean out all of the snow in the Molly Stevens Hill and all of the other hills that had been blocked, and the bus returned the kids home. Other school news, Nashua had a really good marching band when I was in school. Mr. Milby was the teacher. He was from Minnesota, and he liked to march. And he organized not only the band, but a junior group of twirlers out of grade school to also march with the band. So it was a pretty impressive. And he had also led the effort to have uniforms, new uniforms for the band people. So it was a pretty impressive parade group when he had us out marching. And the thing that I probably remember best, the band always marched and played for the Memorial Day program in Nashua. It was always a big program. And our veterans, many of them, marched with the band, and they were in uniform. I miss the Nashua Memorial Days. They had a good program. In memory of the 4th of July, for years, the Nashua community went to the Porcupine Creek north of town. And although most families brought picnics and laid the chicken and potato salad and the buns and the dessert out in the blankets spread on the ground. Our family did this for years with many uncles and aunts and cousins of cousins. The kids got to go swimming if there were no bloodsuckers in the Porcupine Creek that year. And there was usually a baseball game. Organizations set up table and served treats. I do not remember fireworks as a part of that celebration. Anyhow, we had to get home and milk the cow that was waiting to be milked, so didn't get to stay for the fireworks anyhow. In 1951 or 52, Nashua, of course, living along the Milk River, and the Milk River flooded. It flooded lots, but that year was really bad. School was let out, and kids were helping to fill sandbags. There was water up to the back of the businesses, and some of the homes had water up to their, high in the floor. And anyhow, after that, a dike was built after that to protect the town. And now just a few words about the organizations in Nashua through the year. The Lions, my dad was a member long ago, and I was a member, and the group is still hanging on. Put a plug in for them. They could use some more members. And they do so much, especially scholarships for the Nashua school kids. The Lions Park in front of the Senior Citizen Building is maintained by them. They sponsor bazaars. They sponsored many talent shows through the year. And the Senior Center, it's another you might call an organization that a few hardy volunteers made happen some 40 plus years ago when they bought the depot from the railroad and moved it over to its current spot by the Civic Center, providing a place for all community meals and activities to take place. Our little towns have to have strong volunteer base. I belong to some of them. I urge everyone to be involved in that. And maybe just another little bit about the Winterfest and the snowmobile races. For many years, Nashua was known for that wintertime activity. The JCs and the Nashua Slayer Snowmobile Club were the driving forces. And for a number of years, it brought people from all over the county and further to partake in the fun. And it was simple fun. I featured a king and queen, and there was a parade, and there were buttons that you could buy so that you could participate in things like pillow fighting from a log, or pounding a nail into a log. There was a tug of war, something simple like that, and lots of trophies were awarded. And so it was just a fun thing in the middle of the winter. One year they had a dance, well, many years they had a dance, but one of the years, my husband's company sponsored a beard contest, and oh my, so many beards in Nashua, and that, in fact, all over the county. So I got to judge that beard contest, which was kind of fun. So, okay, the second day of the Winterfest, there was usually a snowmobile race, and again, volunteers, but we became unable to continue that activity because you could not get the liability insurance that was needed, and no one wanted to risk their business with some kind of a problem, so we had to back off. So it had taken a lot of volunteers to make it happen. Okay, there was also other organizations. One that I belonged to was WIFE, Women Involved in Farm Economics, but that's a whole other story. One more thing I might add. Nashua History Book is almost 50 years old, and some of us have been talking about adding to that history book activities of the last 50 years and people of the last 50 years, either as a second volume or as a reprint of the book to make it larger. There are people working on this, and they are looking for help. If you think that you could be involved in that kind of thing, why don't you let some of the Nashua people know that you're interested? So do it now. A lot of the Nashua historians have left us. So again, thank you very much to the museum for making this time available to talk about my high school or my school years in Nashua. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks. Bye.
I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
You talked about the tomato can area. Do you know how it got that name, or where's that?
Yeah, our range cows were in the tomato can area to the east of our home, and the tomato can area was always the tomato can. And guessing at it, we think that a sheep herder must have had a tomato can and left it someplace, and I have no idea. that was a short answer.
Oh yeah, oh, interesting name. And then the Bowery that you're talking about, that was just right, so that the road that goes down into Nashua and the curve that goes in front of there, was that always like that?
Yeah.
And then the Bowery you're talking about was just kind of right in that corner of that little curve?
Yeah.
And so there was like a dance floor, or was it just dirt?
I don't remember what the floor was like, and yet I think it must have been something, because how could you dance on just planks? But it was a wooden floor to my memory. And I don't, but it was raised. That platform was raised. You had to go up steps to get into it, and there was a railing around it. Do you remember it? No. And I don't know how many. I think at least a couple of summers that it happened that they had the Bowery dances.
Were there bands, or just played music somehow, or?
No, there was bands.
Oh, nice.
You know, back used to be that people would pull out their fiddle and whatever, and they'd play and entertain easily. But, yeah. And I don't know if it was an organized band. I don't remember that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wouldn't be a bit surprised by what it was, an organized band.
You did a very good job. Very good.
Yes.
Very informative.
Okay, well.
Very fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for the invitation and for listening.